Hey everybody, welcome back to the gardens. This is Garrett with Loving This Land, which I do, and hoping y'all do too. Yesterday I showed you guys garden number 1 over at my parents' place in Renton. This is garden number 2 at a friend of the family's in Kent, about 4 miles away from location 1. This is where I do more of my annual produce. As far as all my staple crops, my tomatoes, my squash, my lettuce, which I do some lettuce over at my parents as well, but mostly my parents have been building into that food forest model that I showed you guys. But this is where I'm doing the produce that I am actually doing a little bit of selling through my business, and I'm only picking out a few crops to really sell this year to focus on actually having enough to sell. And that's going to be a certain few types of squash that I'll show you guys, and lots of beans and heirloom tomatoes, because those are things I can produce a lot of and store pretty easily, and also turn into products if it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to sell them, can them, and everything like that. So those are the sort of things I focus on, just making sure I'm not going to have a bunch of space wasted on something like lettuce where I really just won't be able to sell it. Like, it is a higher profit margin per space. You can really pump it out if you're trying to farm that way, but it's just not feasible for me as one person. But one thing that is nice is in what I'm doing here, all the land I'm using, be it on my parents' land and the family property over in Chelan, I'm not actually paying for any of that. I just do the work here and bring all the produce to the people that own the land. A percentage of it. Obviously, I'm using a ton of it, but yeah, just making sure they're taken care of as well. And that's just the old sharecropping model, essentially. So I'm going to show you guys this place today. It's pretty cool. I started it last year, and same thing, just doing organic methods with compost, rabbit manure. And I didn't really get into that yesterday as far as the rabbit manure. I have a friend, Blake, who lives not too far from here, maybe within 10 miles out on a lake, and he's a really cool fella. He has all this off-grid stuff, be it with going on solar, heating with a wood stove, and just has a little cabin down on the lake that he grows some food on as well. But his main thing is that he has Angora rabbits that he shears the fur from and makes all sorts of products that he weaves old school, just has a loom and everything. It's one of the coolest things I've personally seen. But he also has some quail and some chicken and a couple goats as well, but his main thing is the rabbits. So I get the rabbit manure from him because it's a cold manure that you can add straight on without composting. It's amazing nutrients, high in nitrogen, has a lot of your other nutrients, your phosphorus and potassium as well, and then a lot of your micronutrients, and it just it breaks down and provides an environment that I always find tons of worms in it when I pick it up from him. Same thing, I just bring him out some food, bring him out some kale, bring him out some products I made, whatever, and pick up a wheelbarrow of rabbit manure. It's a great rotating system, and it's actually kind of cool because I brought several things that the rabbits can eat, things that have grown from the garden that their manure fertilized. So it's just that beautiful rotating system that I love. So yeah, I'll bring you guys here starting at the top. So last year I started installing a lot of raspberries in here, and I only put 5 clusters of plants, and they've really started spreading out in this bed. And funny thing is, they ripen up a couple weeks earlier than my strawberries over at my parents, just because this is out in full sun. So they've had ripe strawberries for a couple weeks, whereas I'm just starting to get mine in the last week. So up in this top small bed, I just got some peas starting to come up here on the trellis, and I'm a pretty hopeful thinker, you know. I got these trellising at about 10 feet tall for the peas and for the beans, and then for the tomatoes, they're slightly over 6 feet tall, and that's not hopeful thinking. The tomatoes will get that tall in this model that I'm doing here. So moving down the line, we got a ton of mustard going to seed here, and can't wait to hang that up and get it drying as well. We finally have the heat coming out here for all my friends over in Pennsylvania, or not here in the Seattle area. Just gotta tell you guys, we have not had that heat. We had one little bit of heat earlier in the year that got everyone excited, and then from there on out, it's been mostly rain for the last month, just a couple sunny days. But today is finally 80. We've had some good days the last week, so everything is finally starting to take off. Starting to see a lot of flowering, some little fruits producing on the tomatoes finally, and I feel like things like the tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, and Yeah, that's the main things that have taken the hit from not having the heat yet, just because they thrive in the heat and don't love being in that wetness. So this is a type of lettuce that I've actually had going since early spring. I actually planted the seeds last fall and they didn't really come up. They were just baby, and then they just took off this spring, so that's perfect. All that mustard there that I've only been picking some of the leaves here. I'm mostly just keeping it for the seed. Got some peppers here. I'm focusing on a lot more on peppers this year and some interesting cool varieties, and they're starting to take off. I'm going to come in and fertilize everything with a foliar spray today, which is just taking a pump sprayer and actually spraying down the leaves, and prefer to do this in the evening, not during the whole day, because what actually happens is on the underside of the leaves there's essentially something that's like a pore, and it's called a stomata, and it opens up and it can take in moisture and nutrients among other functions. But if you spray that down with a nutrient rich spray, foliar spray, you can pump some nutrients in really quickly, rather than this organic model of things breaking down and getting to the roots and then being processed up into the plant. No, you can get it in quickly, and some of these plants really look like they need some nitrogen, so I'm going to be doing the pump sprayer and spraying them down after this, once the sun is getting closer to going down. So moving along here, and just a lot more peas coming up the trellising, a lot more strawberries growing along. This is the first section of tomatoes here, and we got tons of different varieties, and what I'm doing is a packed in system where I'm putting them not far apart. Like they're only 6 to 8 inches apart, because I start for variety, and those I started in the same cup, and then each variety I only spaced a little over a foot apart. So it's a pretty packed in system. But what I'm going and doing is every elbow where you see these suckers, I'm pulling those off. I'm not allowing it to branch out like you see a lot of tomatoes doing. I'm only letting it grow up its single stem and produce these fruit clusters, and that's actually going to produce a lot more fruit per cluster, and a lot heavier fruit, but you're not going to end up with as much fruit per plant. But I have way more plants in this system than you would, so the system yield is going to be much higher than having one plant every 2.5 feet that you let branch out. This is going to be a packed in model, but you got to keep it pruned up, removing leaves and removing those suckers, otherwise it branches out and can lead to fungal issues. They're touching each other too much and not allowing for air movement to dry out, especially with tomatoes that don't like their leaves to be wet. They really prefer to be dry. So over here we have a lot of cilantro that's getting close to bolting, going to flower, but I'm going to come in and lop it down and use it for a couple different things. Obviously seasoning some different things, flavoring some different things, making some pestos, interesting pestos, not just the standard basil pesto. So moving along in this model, got a little chamomile in here growing up. You can't barely see it in there, just starting to flower. And much more strawberries. Put an artichoke in there this year. Still all these different varieties of tomatoes, and I'll actually get my chart out as we move along, and I made a whole chart of this because I can't memorize every variety of tomato, especially since it hasn't really started fruiting yet. Once it fruits, I can really show you guys what kind of each variety there is, but currently I just have the map that I can go along and see what each variety is. So with these tomatoes so far, I've only done a bottom level of trellising, and I've done a method here called the Florida weave, where you literally, as the name implies, just go along, you tie at the side of the trellis, and you just weave back and forth around each tomato. And that's what I've done along this entire length here of tomatoes. I've only done one row of it so far because they're just now starting to take off and get taller, so I got to keep doing more and more layers of that. And then I'm going to put a board on top of this tomato trellis here and string downward so it's much stronger, because that'll start to slip on the sides once the fruits start getting heavy. So got some more pepper varieties here, and this is probably the most beautiful pepper I've ever seen. It's a variety called the Buena Mulata, and it produces these gorgeous purple peppers. In the sun here, it's a little hard to tell. See if we can get it in the shade either. But these peppers are just amazing. They're purple, and they're actually going to go through many color changes. This little one starting out up top here, if we can see, is actually yellow. And then right at the tip, you can see that it's starting to turn purple. As it gets to just a little bit bigger, it's going to be solid purple. But before that ripens, that's going to turn a sort of peach color, then a brownish color, then a dark red. And that'll be its final stage if you want it to get to full heat, which is hotter than a Cayenne. It can get up to about 80,000 Scoville heat units, whereas a Cayenne is generally around 30 to 50,000. This is around 60 to 90,000, whereas a jalapeno is generally around like 3 to 8,000. So I got some different levels. I got sweet peppers. I got something called a Edgevarsky pepper here. Got some lemon jalapenos, got some lipstick peppers, which are another little sweet pepper. Got some sweet banana peppers, but just several different varieties of peppers that are just now starting to take off with the heat. They weren't, I actually have some Tabasco peppers there as well, which you don't see often, but they're the actual variety that makes the Tabasco sauce. But you then have to ferment that sauce for a couple years to get it to be that Tabasco level. But more peas growing up this trellis here, and bunch more mustard that's producing its seed pods now. And the property I'm growing on here is actually a friend, my relative of my neighbor, essentially, my parents' neighbor, and he used to live on this property as a kid, and he's a 70-something-year-old fella now, and his parents used to own this property and garden organically on it, and they had a few beds here, but they also have several things here that have been here for the last 50 years that just amazing. So over there, those big bushes at the back are blueberries, and I'll show you guys up close what sort of blueberries they have on them, because a few of the bushes are pretty loaded, and so being 50 years old, they just keep pruning them back, and they get up to a big level where they're not producing as great anymore, so you lop them back, and then they'll produce heavily again. But he has grapes all along this fence line here, and horseradish growing over there, and I've started putting some things in, some peach trees in the back lot there. And they're all on well water here. So in this method, I'm not really watering, because when you mulch deeply, and especially being in Seattle, we get a lot of rain anyways, but when you mulch deeply, it conserves that moisture. So even though it's really hot right now, underneath that, this is wet. Like, this is completely wet underneath it. So that's amazing. And I started using the hay this year because we actually have a mole problem out here. The moles keep coming up. They haven't really destroyed anything, but they keep disrupting the mulch, and I think it actually hurts some of the plants over there where I had wood chips, because if you get wood chips tied up in your soil, it can actually hold back some of your nutrients, your nitrogen, because that's not fully done breaking down. It's going to sequester that nitrogen and keep it from being bioavailable to your plant's roots. That's obviously not ideal. So I'm going to go backwards here just so I'm filming out of the beam of the sun. So we'll go along the next lane. And this next lane here is all beans at the back, pole beans. And so you have two different varieties of beans. Bush beans that are grown over there that only get about 20 inches tall. And then we have pole beans here, which are your traditional, as the name says, they grow up the pole. So they're gonna get that 10 feet tall. Last year they easily hit that, and they'll produce all year long, whereas those bush beans will produce one big crop and be done. So I'm gonna plant at least one more round of those bush beans to keep that going. So all these beans, I have 4 different varieties growing along the back here, and some came up pretty sparsely, so I'm gonna replant with some other stuff. So beans at the back, and there's some really cool varieties. I picked up most of my seeds new. I already had a lot of seeds as far as some tomatoes, but picked up a lot of varieties of stuff from a company called Baker Creek out in Missouri, the Ozark Mountains, and they produce all sorts of cool organic heirloom seeds, non-GMO. And so I have 4 different types of pole beans there, 4 different types of bush beans, 4 different types of peas, and they're all incredible. Like, there's something called a King Tut pea that is rumored to have come from a pot. So when they opened up King Tut's tomb in the 1920s, pharaohs used to have all sorts of food in their tomb with them for the afterlife, and in King Tut's tomb, supposedly they found a jar of peas, and like many things that they found in the tombs, they were still perfectly preserved. And they preserved a lot of things in honey, and they were just good at sealing things off in general. I mean, obviously with the whole mummification process anyways, but yeah, so they had these peas. So they're a purple potted pea, like the variety I showed you at my parents got yesterday, but they're supposed to be a sweet pea, not a shelling pea. So, and then in front of all the beans here, I planted different squash and cucumbers. So right here is spaghetti squash, which I had good luck with last year. They produced a lot of a lot of squash per plant. I think per plant I got, I don't know, something like 10 of them, and I gave some of those away. I ate some, and then some just actually went as Halloween decoration, but they're delicious. You cut them open and you split them with a fork, and they make kind of a pasta-like sort of dish. So they're really starting to put out. They're gonna start having their flowers soon. Moving along here, so more mustard as well. And then in front of that here is a red curry squash, and it's a straight up red squash variety that looks like something, I believe, out of Africa. It's curry, or no, it actually comes out of India if I remember. And so that's going to be a cool variety. A lot more tomatoes here, same thing, did the Florida weave method of trellising them up, and I'm going to keep trellising them up. And now that sun is hit, hopefully they will take off like crazy. Some different varieties of cucumbers here that I also got from Baker Creek, and there's something called a dragon egg cucumber, and then there's also a lemon cucumber that's supposed to be really sweet and delicious. But the dragon egg is a white one, pretty good size, or a slicer. And I'll make some pickles out of it as well. Got some beets growing here that I harvest the leaves from, and I harvested a couple actual of the bulbs the other day. Some more cucumbers. This is probably the biggest tomato plant so far of the year, so not giants yet, but starting to take off, but very good fruit clusters growing in. I am pleased about that, so I think it'll be great. Hopefully with this rain early on in this year, it'll mean heat later on in the year, because I had rain come in early and destroy things last year. So, oh, I forgot to mention in that lane, I established a few different patches of chives that are starting to grow in pretty nicely too, and those are perennial. Those will come back year after year, so that's nice. Some more cucumbers, planted some melons over here somewhere. Where are you, melon? Or are you here? You melon. I gotta look at my chart. This should be the honey rock melon that I grew here last year, and they're a personal sized cantaloupe. Delicious though, so sweet. And so I saved seed from it and I'm regrowing it, and I'm hoping it'll, you know, start to acclimatize to this environment and do better and better. So that's gonna start taking off here shortly. I should have planted all my squash a little sooner. I just wanted to make sure. I had a time a couple years ago where seeds didn't come up because I planted them too soon. So got some eggplants here starting to take off again. They're another heat loving one that are taking a while to take off. Whole patch of carrots here that should be harvested about the middle of next month, I'm thinking. And I started looking at a couple of the crowns. They're starting to look nice, so I am excited. I believe this is the Oxheart variety that grows really fat and short, so excited to see those. Have some carrots here as well, but it looks like the rabbits had fun with them because they got pretty nibbled. Not looking fantastic. Got some chard over here, some Swiss chard of different colors and varieties, and also some lettuce here, that same Yetakule variety from my parents' place. But there's some red chard and some yellow chard and just plain normal green chard. But chard isn't that delicious just to eat in a salad. Like collard greens and like certain varieties of kale, I'll be using it in soups and in stir fries and just to make vegetable stock, where I take a ton of it and simmer it down in water just to make that vegetable broth that I can use for soup making. So I have some varieties of kale here and there. called Thunderhead, and they're gonna produce giant leaves of kale. Like, they're supposed to be a good foot or two long at least. And so then I also do have my medical cannabis plants that I'm growing, and for the purposes of these garden videos, I'm not going to be focusing much time on them as far as telling people about them. I'm not an expert when it comes to those, and it's just a fun thing. It's my medicinal plants. I've had my medicinal marijuana card since before. I prefer not to use that term. Cannabis is the proper word. Marijuana is a term invented, but yeah, so I've had my card since before legalization even, so I've been growing that. I make edibles out of it, and also make some for the guy who lives here. He doesn't smoke, he just enjoys having the edibles, so that works out well. And so I have some plants here this year, and have some clones along there, and then some from seed, and a couple are from seed that I grew from plants last year that had a few seeds be produced. So we'll see how those turn out, and they really need the fertilizing today. They need some serious nitrogen. They have some yellowing of the leaves and just a weird structure. So some of these I got as clones, so they're already big and healthy, but the ones I started from seed are a little behind. So see how those turn out. Should be good. Every year it's been good. I do it completely organic and outdoor, and no pesticides or fungicides or anything funny. So some of them are looking really healthy already, but like I said, not going to focus a lot of time on that. Most of it is just on producing food here, because a lot of people aren't in the minds or means to be growing that, and like I said, there's much better sources to learn from on that. So I just do a natural method and let them go just like all the rest of my plants. Got another variety of kale here, known by lots of different names. It goes by lacinato kale, dinosaur kale, or you can call it Nero di Toscana cabbage, because as I was saying yesterday, all those things in the brassica family, the kale, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, mustard, collards, they're all so similar that this is essentially a loose leaf cabbage, also classified as, but we also classify it as a kale. So it's more of your traditional, slightly bitter kale taste. It's not my favorite of all of them. My favorite is probably the blue curly so far, or the red Russian, mostly during the cold obviously, but these will get a pretty good size. And kale is one of the ones that it is a biennial, so it'll last all year, grow through the winter, and then it'll be growing again in the spring, and it'll produce its flowers, which are just like those mustard flowers. It'll produce those in the spring and then die off. But actually, I've found it won't even die off. I cut the flowers back and it'll continue growing, just like the ones I showed yesterday. So moving along here, have some more kale that I just transplanted from this cluster over there, and all these bush beans. And as I was saying with the problem with the moles, this lane I had wood chips on last year to cover as a mulch, and just those moles came up and really turned it up and got it mixed in with the soil. And I think that's a problem, because these beans are having a few spots where there's some yellowing leaf area. That's just leaves I took off, but they're not looking as deep and magnificent of a green as I would like them to, which is actually odd, because beans, being a legume just like peas, they form a symbiotic relationship with a fungus in the roots, and they actually end up creating their own nitrogen via that relationship. They'll feed sugars that plants produce, sugars through photosynthesis, and then are able to trade that through their roots for nutrients through a fungal association. So many plants do that with another type of fungus called mycorrhizae, that it'll feed off the plant roots as well, and it'll extend for miles in each direction. It's much thinner and more fibrous than a root, so it works its way into all sorts of crevices and nooks and whatnot, and grabs nutrients and brings it back to the plant to trade. So funnily enough, if you think about it, plants are the only real producers of their own food in the world. Everything else is feeding off of something else. Everything else is a parasite in some sort of way, including ourselves. But plants are the only ones that figured out the process to feed off the sun. Not saying anything about them being good or bad, just a cool thought. But yeah, all the bush beans are starting to flower real heavily, starting to look good, so I'm excited to see that. I actually saw a couple little beans growing in. Let's see if we can find one. Yeah, there's a little bean. Little beans starting to come in, so they grow quick once they come in. So later this week with all this sun, we'll be picking tons of beans. Bush beans all along here, and I left some gaps that I'm going to start planting out the next round of late fall squash, which is going to be my Lady Godiva pumpkins and Jarradale pumpkins, which are really cool. The Lady Godiva pumpkins have a pumpkin seed that doesn't have the shell on it, so it can be straight pressed, straight eaten. They're called pepitas. I mean, I don't mind the shell on pumpkin seeds. They're good, of course, when you roast them up and all that, but having it this way, I want to have a source to be able to create oil. Like, I don't grow olives, obviously. I'm not going to be growing avocados here in Washington, and holding sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds is a pain in the butt. So having a type of pumpkin that doesn't have that hole and you can just straight use the seed is amazing. So I'm going to be doing that. I need to plant out some more melons here because those didn't come up or they got eaten by slugs. Got a few areas of gray zucchini coming in, so these ones are starting to look good and take off. And it's funny, these plants are almost primarily female flowers, so you'll see on squash plants that they have two different types of flowers. They'll have a flower like this that has a little fruit at the bottom of it already, and that's the female flower. And then you'll have other flowers that don't have that and just extend on a vine like this guy down here, and doesn't have a fruit at the bottom. And that's going to be the male flower, and you'll straight up see their parts on the inside that the female flower will have a gap, whereas the male flower has the protrusion that creates the has the stamen and creates the pollen, whereas that's going to have the pistils to gather the pollen and create the seed. So have some more beets and some more kale in there, and let's see here. This is some more gray zucchini, and what I found really interesting is these ones over here are almost all male flowers, whereas those ones over there are almost all female flowers. So it's almost like a trade-off, like they sense each other and know that, you know, you need a balance for that pollination. So we'll see. These two types of squash that are starting to look really nice there are Como squash, and they're one of the favorites of New Zealand. And apparently you can use them as a summer squash. You use them young and cut them up and fry, you know, throw them in the oven, roast them just how you would any, you know, zucchini or acorn or zucchini or butternut squash or something along those lines. Or you can save them and let the rinds harden more like a pumpkin or an acorn squash or a spaghetti squash, and have them for storage purposes. And they're striped green and orange, look really cool. So I'm excited to be harvesting those. Way back over against that garage is where I harvested the garlic that you guys saw in my pictures the other day, or maybe you didn't. It was a purple variety and a plain white variety, and the white was the hard neck, purple was the soft neck. Soft neck is generally for storage, hard neck is a little shorter term but more flavorful. So now there's just some asparagus growing out over there, but I'm deciding what to replant it with. I'm thinking some variety of bush type squash, maybe a scallop squash or something along those lines. So yeah, just wanted to get this video out to you guys. Very glad I'm finally able to show you all the production garden. It is coming along. I'm so happy to finally have the sun beaming down on us. I'm excited to have some zucchini soon, and yeah, that's about it, people. Thank you so much for watching. Again, please share if you enjoyed. If you have any questions, or if you guys are interested in gardening or self-sufficiency or what to do with any products, you may already be gardening, or what to do if you were going to decide to garden and use some products, let me know. I will answer any questions anybody has. Thank you again. Loving this land. Hope y'all do too. Peace.